afternoon. Well, it's between Christmas and New Year's, so it's time to start looking forward to putting 2020 behind us. Boy, do we need to do that. So I'm going to cook up some traditional stuff. I'm here, Brian, cooking at home. I've got some black-eyed peas, which are very traditional, especially in the South, for New Year's. I've got some collard greens, which were also very traditional, and I'll explain that a little bit more, and some cornbread. So in Southern traditions, black-eyed peas are very much a traditional food of New Year's because, well, according to one legend, they were brought over by Sephardic Jews back in the early days of the colonies, and that this was a popular staple. But another New Year's tradition is that in the year that the African Americans were emancipated by Abraham Lincoln, that first New Year's, the only food they had to eat were black-eyed peas. And they would accompany that with one of the only greens they had, which were collard greens, which represented money. And they would also eat that with cornbread, which represented gold. And one of the aspects about black-eyed peas is that because they would swell when they were hydrated, that implied prosperity. And pork is also an element in the preparations because in the tradition, pigs were always moving forward and routing forward, and that was symbolic of moving forward into the new year. So that's an overview of what I have here. Thank you, Roxy. We're going to go ahead and start making each of these dishes, but I also wanted to share with you that our friends at Goodwin House have some Goodwin House tidings and greetings to share along the way.
Χρόνια πολλά, καλά Χριστούγεννα, ευτυχισμένος ο καινούριος χρόνος. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, may you have a blessed New Year. On behalf of dining services and the whole team, we wish you well. Thank you.
Happy New Year!
All right, so we're going to start by cooking our black-eyed peas. What I've got here, I've got about 3 pounds of black-eyed peas, which I've rehydrated. That is to say, I've soaked them in water to absorb water, and that will help them cook a little faster. I've got here what's called a bouquet garni. In this case, it's celery and carrots, all wrapped up with thyme, sage, and rosemary in a big bundle. And I'm going to let that cook together with my peas. We're going to put 2 ham hocks in there, and I've got an onion. We call this onion piqué. That's an onion that is stuck with cloves, and we're going to cook that together with our peas there too. And I'm going to throw in some garlic cloves just for good measure and flavor. Okay, we're going to bring that up to a boil, turn that down to a simmer. Now, the one thing that we don't put in the beans or the peas now that we will later is salt, because if we put salt in the beans now, they will not become tender. They'll stay very tough until they turn to mush. By keeping the salt out of the initial cooking stage, they'll cook up nice and tender. Then we'll season them.
From all of us to all of you, Happy New Year, and may God continue to bless you all. Happy New Year!
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year!
So for our collard greens, which as we remember, not only is the chlorophyll that we need in our diet, but this is symbolic of prosperity and money in the Southern New Year's Eve tradition. So, we're cooking our collard greens. I'm going to melt a little bit of butter. I've got these beautiful smoked pieces of pork butt, and I'm going to let those flavor and enrich our greens, and also provide a little bit of fat on top of that butter. And I'm going to add my onions and garlic. Let those all cook and sweat a little bit till they're nice and tender. And then I'll put my collard greens on top of that and cook them down. And we're going to finish them with a little bit of apple cider and Tupelo honey.
Happy New Year to all of you from the bottom of my heart.
One. Happy New Year!
All right, so my cornbread, which represents gold, is out of the oven, and I have a cool way to invert my cornbread. So I'm going to go on another sheet tray the same size. There's my baking paper. And then I can flip that right onto the cutting board.
I just want to say Happy New Year! Yes.
3.
Happy New Year, everyone.
All right, cornbread's done. Getting ready to cook, finish our collard greens here. Let's take a look at our black-eyed peas. They've been simmering down. That liquid is nice and reduced. The meat is tender on my ham hocks. And those vegetables that went into that bouquet garni, I'm going to take those out of the twine and chop them up as the garnish for the beans. Check our beans, make sure they're nice and tender. So now I'm able to adjust the seasoning with salt and butter. And I'm going to take those vegetables out. Go ahead and chop those up and add them back to my beans. As well as my ham hocks. All right, I'm going to cut those down, take the meat off of the bone, add it back to the beans.
Oh, you want me to say something?
While our New Year's Eve feast is finishing on the stove, it's time to start thinking about the bubbles, okay? To be truly called champagne means that it is produced in Champagne, France. Bubbles that are made outside of Champagne, France are referred to as method champenoise. Regardless, there are several wrong ways to open a bottle of champagne, but there's only one right way to open a bottle of champagne. Let's look at the wrong ways first. One of the wrong ways to open a bottle of champagne is with an axe, okay? And the way that we would do that is that we would get a tremendous amount of force going with that axe right up to the fulcrum, to the top of that bottle, and break the glass using the pressure of the champagne to blow the glass and the cork away. It's very dramatic and it's used to make a big scene, but it's kind of hazardous to be pouring champagne from a broken bottle. I'm just saying. One other way not to open a bottle of champagne for the sake of the champagne is to christen a boat with it. So the preferred technique for getting the cork out of the champagne or the sparkling wine is to lose as little carbonation as possible. And it's interesting because in the 1920s and 30s and before, there was something known as a champagne whisk, where they would actually whisk the carbonation or the bubbles out of the champagne because it tickled their noses. But nowadays, we conserve just a whisper.
Happy New Year! Happy New Year! Woo! Happy New Year!
So let's take a look at our collard greens. Oh, okay. Looking nice and tender. We're going to finish them with just a little drizzle of Tupelo honey. And a few drops of vinegar. A little bit of butter. And those are good to go. Take a look at our black-eyed peas. Nice and tender, cooked through, just like a ragu. So, let's plate up some black-eyed peas, collard greens, and cornbread. So there's a traditional New Year's Eve meal, and from all of us in dining services, Goodwin House,